Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going through a series of video presentations for the Rankin Technical College Application and Web Development AWD1111 .NET Framework with Web Databases class. The book we're using for the class is ASP.NET MVC with Entity Framework and CSS by Mr. Lee Naylor. I'm in the middle of Chapter 15. What I did, FYI, was I went out and downloaded the Chapter 16 stuff so you can see the changes we're making. Alright, so there was the pink in our headings. You see that. This is the stuff we added to the footer. So you notice that the background is now a different shade of blue. The text is a white. We added the padding, the line height, etc. as you had seen in the previous chapter. So now they're talking about the float property. And it says the float property can be used to position elements side by side on a web page. Setting float moves an element outside of its normal flow on a page. Many people who work with this find that using floats is amongst the hardest thing to work with in CSS. All right, because floats can just be weird. Now, if you are one of those people, okay, what they want us to add this, so let's add that. So this is saying we want everything that we're putting in here, in other words our pictures, we want them to float to the left. Alright, so let's go back to here, baby store, come down here. So anything with a class of col MD3, alright, which means basically a medium screen size of 3, have it float to the left. What that's going to do is it's going to take these pictures that previously had been one after the other and put them all in the same line. So that's what we're doing right now with this. Okay? All right. So I've given you the after picture. If you go and run through it, it looks like this, so it's not spaced very well. But we'll talk about the spacing that you have to add in just a second. Now notice this note here that's on page 490 where the author says, hey, what has happened over time is people have decided that the float stuff is too weird to work with. Some people believe that, at least. So CSS now supports something that's called Flexbox. When you use Flexbox, as it mentions here, it provides a set of properties that allow you to lay out things without having to do floats. If you go out to W3Schools.com CSS, and I mentioned that to you before, all right, if we click on here, there's a whole thing in here about Flexbox. So this is the same one I'd shown you before. So if you go into W3 Schools, period, okay, and you go to CSS and under tutorials, all right, if we look long enough, somewhere in here, and I don't know where it is, but there it is, Flexbox. That's exactly what they're showing in here. And they give a lot of different examples. By no means do I consider myself an expert on CSS, and even less so with Flexbox. But if you don't use Flexbox, and you float things to the left, everything you do after that is automatically floated to the left, unless you clear it. Now when you clear like this, you can clear none, you can clear left, you can clear right, or you can clear both. By doing a clear both, as it says now, everything that follows this will now return to the normal flow of the page. So we're going to put that in here next. And so that will come in right after our call MD3. All right. So it says after the row where we just set everything, we're going to do a clear both. Now, what does that do? Well, if we take a look up on our page here, that changes it. So it's, again, it's looking a little nicer. All right, it says The code works by using the pseudo class :after to apply the style to anything that appears after the row class. All right. Well, the next thing to do is to style the images. So we want to add width of 25%. Now, when you think about it, that should make sense. What do I mean? Well, let's go back to here. And we're supposed to add this. All right. That says our things in there with the 4 columns rather, we want each one to take up a quarter. Well, notice that it does now, so it automatically puts space in between each of the images. All right. Next, we want a small bottom margin for our H1 and our H2 tags, so they don't butt up against them. See that right here? So we're going to add a small margin to our H1 and our H2 tags. You see that in many ways this is a never-ending saga. In other words, when you do this, all right, when you do this, you're constantly tweaking. Now we're going to add a deep sky blue border around the images with slightly rounded corners. And again, in my humble opinion, since we're doing all this stuff together in here, it makes sense to keep all that stuff together where we currently are. All right. And after we do that, what you're going to notice is, okay, there's the background, etc., but it's looking a little bit nicer. We've got that sky blue border around here, etc. Okay. All right. Next is link styling, and that is on the middle of page 493. So it says next we need to do something with the links for each product. Currently they're pretty small because the font size was inherited from our body style. So in other words, they were set up back in here to have a font size of 12 pixels, which is relatively small. All right, but we're going to come in and change that right now. So we're going to set up a new class because it's got the dot. All right, and we're going to say that the font size will be 18 pixels, which is 1.5 ems, and the weight will be 700, which means 800 is about as bold as you can get on that. So it's going to be fairly bolder than it currently is. All right, so I'm putting that in, moving this stuff over. Again, where you put it is irrelevant to the system, but it can make it much easier for you to find things when you put things in there naturally. Now update the home index.cshtml file in order to add the class in. So it says to add the attributes that are shown in bold there. All right, so again, we want to bring the views home index.cshtml file. Views home, there's our index.cshtml file, and we want to add what is shown here in our text on the top of page 494. So we want to change this null that's here. And we want to add that. Okay, so we're adding to this, for our products, we're adding that new class of large bold text. As it says, this will take the links and make them much bigger. So they're 1.5 times larger than they were, and they're now bolded. All right, next, bottom of page 494. Now we're going to show you how to update all the links so that they are all the same color as the other ones on the page. So, A, meaning anchor tag, this is visited, so whether it's regular or visited, we're going to change the color Okay? And when you hover over them, they're going to go to this hot pink that's right here. All right, after that, we are to come in and change the color upon hovering to make the underline reappear. Right, and if we take a look at that on the next page, notice that the difference. All right, when we hover over it, how it changes the color. All right, so those are our restyle links. Notice the underline is gone from these, but when we hover, it turns pink and the underline comes back. All right, moving up to 495, styling a hyperlink to look like a button. We're now going to style the Shop Now link so that it looks and behaves like a button. All right, it says we're going to treat the CSS styles as follows. A dot button will represent any link that is a button. A primary will represent a color. Primary is green. A button large will determine the size of the button. Add two new styles to store.css to change the color of any hyperlink that is of class button primary as follows. So it'll have a primary color of lawn green, but when you hover over it, it'll change to a, quote, regular green, unquote. You can put all this on the same line as the author has done here. You'll notice I'm spacing it out. I think it looks a little nicer, and it's much easier when you're going through, if you ever have to come in and debug, to do it the way that I'm doing it here. So you can see what we're doing here. It says there are still a number of issues. It does not look like a button yet, and the text is not a suitable color, and changes the color to pink when you hover over it. These are both due to the inheriting that we have done earlier. Okay? There's the pink. All right. To stop the link from overlapping the HR element, which is in there, which really looks unprofessional with that HR, what we're going to do is make that HR, for lack of better words, kind of disappear. So we're going to add a bottom margin first to our Jumbotron class, and since the Jumbotron is virtually at the top, we're going to move that way up. Okay, so that's the first thing. Next, we want to add a new style for the button, as it says, to make it appear to have rounded corners. Ensure that the text is always white and there's no underline. So we're setting this up for our button class, and again, that would make the most sense to actually take and put that under where we added our button stuff previously. There it is. If we decide we want to move all of the button stuff, then literally, as I just said, we should move all of the button stuff. So if I want to move all of this, I can grab all of it and I can put it right underneath the Jumbotron, for example. All right, and I should be consistent here with the way, and I should be adding more comments. I'm just running a little short on time, so I'm not going to do that. All right, but I'll come back and try to change them in the final product. So, since to give the button a more raised look, we're also going to give it a border. There we go. The Shop Now link button now looks much more professional, as you can see right here. Now this is a really important point. If you look at this note here that's on page 498, we're just about through the chapter here. It says you're probably wondering, why didn't we just nest a button element? All right, it says because you can't. It's not valid HTML in the HTML5 spec. All right. Finally, we are going to take that HR tag and we're going to make sure that it does not display by using the display none. So that HR tag that was right here will be gone. As it says here, using display none removes the HR tag from the flow of the page. It now takes up 0 space, but technically it's still there. All right, in the DOM or document object model, which means it still can be manipulated if we decide we want to, need to, whatever, bring it back at a later time. Right. So let's grab this last one. And again, that's that HR that we're telling we want to have removed. So when we get all done, again, I brought up the picture from Chapter 16. It now looks like this. Notice we get that kind of a weird green, but when we hover over it, it gets to a dark green. So that's green, and that's like a lawn green. It's white. So you can see all the changes that we have made. All right. So this chapter showed several different CSS topics, and we restyled the home page. All right. What we will do in the next chapter, and I won't be going over this until tomorrow, we will start talking about styling forms, grid layouts, and tables. And I'll be back with that tomorrow.